Welcome everyone to the Wednesday, May 15th, 2024 Continuous Improvement Advisory Committee meeting. We may have a short list of participants today. We've heard from Ted that he is unable to attend. Paula was a tentative, and Mayor Rod Cross accepted, but he's not here yet. We're also missing Mac Lynn, and Tova is stepping in for him today. So let's go ahead and get started. We have two things on the agenda today. The first is the continuation of the project delivery overview, and Tova will be covering that. And then we are going to have a discussion about transportation electrification, where we are and going forward. We did make a few changes to the upcoming meetings in 2024 for some scheduling reasons. And so what we'll be doing is June, we're going to be doing the key performance measure report. We had to accelerate that to meet our legislative timelines. We'll break in July. August will be major projects over 50 million, which is another one of our mandatory topics for reporting. We'll take a break in September. October 16th, we'll have project cost estimating and the Office of Equity and Civil Rights. And November 20th, climate actions and audits, and then year-end overview in December. So with that, I will turn it over to Tova for continuation of the project delivery overview.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith. My name is Tova Peltz. I am the Deputy Administrator for the Delivery and Operations Division, and I presented with Mac back in March to share our program delivery challenges. The information we also shared with the commission in March, and then more recently, as last week, May 9th. So I wanted to follow up on the conversation we had in March and share some progress that we're making towards improving project delivery. Wanted to dive into our cost forecasting approach that we're pursuing for STIP programming. Tell you a bit more about it. And
well, I'm going to interrupt you for a second because I see Amanda has her hand up. Amanda?
Me? I must have hit the button incorrectly. My apologies.
No worries.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Tova. Go ahead.
No problem at all. So there were a lot of questions when we were here in March, specifically about all of the data we have about our delivery program, and the work we're doing on cost forecasting really relies on the data. So I thought y'all might be interested in hearing more about that. So that is what we wanted to share and get some input on. So we can flip to the next slide here. So just as a recap, we identified a number of areas where we are making improvements in program delivery, and our programming strategy for the 2730 capital program, our STIP, is to ensure on time and on budget delivery is one of those areas. And so that's what we're focusing on today in this presentation and conversation. And there are a number of other areas as well, but this is today's focus, and one area that we've been like digging into in particular over the last 2 months. Next slide. So to provide some context, I know that David Kim and members of the statewide, like his team in the statewide project delivery branch, have presented to CIAC in the past to talk about cost estimating. And I wanted to provide some context to differentiate cost estimating, the cost estimating conversations that have happened to date, differentiate those from this topic of cost forecasting for programming the STIP. We go through a series of cost estimating exercises over the course, over the life of a project and through the life of our portfolio. And statewide project delivery branch has done some tremendous work over the last last 4 or 5 years to expand our cost estimating tools once we have, like, for individual projects, and once we have projects underway in design. And that has been the focus of the presentations to date, especially when it comes to cost estimating as we approach bidding and contract award. I'm going to be talking about the cost estimating work that happens, like in our case, like years in advance of that. And I'm going to share a graphic in just a moment that sort of puts that into sort of more of a visual context, talking about the whole life cycle of projects. In the case of cost estimating, as I said, we do cost estimating in a number of key points over the life of a project, and I'm going to be focused on that the cost estimating, and I'd like to say cost forecasting, that we do to identify the initial funding allocations for projects across the whole portfolio. And then once projects are identified to be identified and programmed for delivery, we do cost estimating work at 30% design and 100% design, and then manage costs through contract award and construction delivery. So we've done a tremendous amount of work focusing on the cost estimating work that happens at 30% design, 60%, 100%. We've spent less time looking at and talking about, and certainly sharing with this audience, the work that we do for cost estimating at the very beginning of a capital funding cycle. And that is, and we're seeing some gaps as a result of that. I think about that initial cost estimating effort as being at less than 5% design. I mean, we know we've identified the purpose and need for a project, but we're really just beginning to wrap our arms around what the scope of a project could be, and have only an inkling of the risks that are the project specific risks that are associated with that. So we're working on a new approach to cost forecasting at that early 5% mark that is more conceptual, and also that gives us more adequately addresses all of the uncertainty that projects are carrying at that point, in the process. Let's go to the next slide, which gives a little bit more, I guess, visual, a little bit more of a visual cue. So this is the project life cycle, the racetrack, we call it. And I think that many of you have probably seen this before through the cost estimating presentations that have happened in the past with CIAC. When the presentations in the past have really been focused on the portions of this racetrack that are yellow, project initiation in the bottom right corner through bid opening, sort of at the bottom left corner in yellow. But what we're seeing is that the cost estimating work that happens in the orange portion of the life cycle, the beginning of the life cycle, is really where we're struggling, and where we haven't invested as much effort, and where we're trying to make some improvements. This life cycle represents our capital investment program, which is currently a four-year cycle, and projects are identified for delivery through a prioritization process that really focuses on asset condition and safety needs primarily. And as we identify what the priority projects, we put together preliminary cost estimates for those projects, and those are used to program program the projects in the STIP, essentially to identify how much money will be set aside to deliver each of those projects that we're committing to through the establishment of the statewide transportation improvement program, that capital cycle. I know this is super jargony, so don't hesitate to raise hands if you have questions, or drop questions in the chat. I see the chat. Okay.
Can I ask a quick question? This is Shauna.
Absolutely.
Just in terms of process. So at what point do you know how much money you're going to get in the STIP? So I guess what I'm wondering is okay, so this is the process for identifying projects, but we don't know how much those projects are going to cost yet. At what point do we know how much money we're getting, that ODOT is getting for capital projects, versus how much money those projects are going to cost?
That's a great question.
Does that make sense?
No, that's a great question. Absolutely makes sense. So, the STIP allocations are determined before we go down the path of scoping projects and cost estimating projects. So the allocations are established through allocations from federal highways, and then there's the distribution of those funds across like the different program funding categories is brought to the Transportation Commission, and typically there's some flexibility, but in many of the categories there's a set percentages of that total amount that go to different categories, and those allocations to different programs such as the bridge program, pavements program, culverts program, safety program are identified, and then we go through a process to identify what projects can be delivered and will be prioritized for delivery and funding based on that to fit within that allocation.
So I have one more question.
Yep.
It's like really like temporal in nature. So like we're planning right now, I think for 26 to 2030, right? That's the step we're looking.
2730, correct.
26 to 30. Okay. So are we looking at like funding different, like how do you get projects into the pipeline, and is it reasonable to deliver a project in that period of time? And like what I'm thinking about is like, I don't know, like on the utility side of things, like there's different funding phases. So like for a substation upgrade, you have to fund the design work, and the design work will tell you how much the construction and like what permitting you'll need, and the construction costs. And so like is part of this like we're going to fund the design work for 6 bridges and the construction of 8 bridges, or like is this all construction?
This is funding for like design through construction.
But like if we're designing a project for this step, like does that necessarily mean it gets delivered, it gets like constructed in that time period as well, or could it roll over?
Well, it's a great question. A project could have construction funds that are allocated to be essentially programmed through an awarded contract in federal fiscal year 2027. So between October of 2026 and September of 2027. No, yes, that's right. And so construction could start in that fiscal year, and it could be a multi-year project that extends 27, 28, 29 or beyond. That is not uncommon. The construction can extend beyond that 2730 timeline. Like, so when we're talking about the 2730 step, it is possible that we will be programming projects that could start construction in 2030 and could continue to be in construction through like 2032 or even 2033, depending on the size of the complexity of the project.
And would those projects, would the construction costs roll into the next step, or would that be in this step?
They would be programmed in this step.
Okay. All right. So they'd be funded at this step, but it would roll over to the next step. And okay.
But
I understand.
But it is also possible to program design to program design in one step cycle, and then program construction or other phases for that matter in the next step cycle. That is also a programming strategy that we can take, and sometimes we do.
Okay. Yeah, just because it seems like once you fund design, you have a much better, more accurate view of what construction costs will be, and that might be one strategy to pursue.
Yep. Absolutely. And it's actually something that's come up quite a bit in the conversation in the last few months, that the way that we're programming our STIP today is really tied to this 4-year cycle, but there's no reason. It's actually, I think, unusual for a DOT to take that approach, and it would be very possible to have a rolling planning cycle, like a rolling planning cycle where projects are added to the STIP sort of more on a rolling basis over time, so we can like develop them further. I think that is not how ODOT has done it to date, and I think that's something that we need to dig more into to figure out manage funds to ensure to like get project design started, to better understand the cost of projects before we program construction. So that is one that is an approach. It's not what, like, because of just sort of the timing for the 2730 step, it's not something that we're going to be able to reconcile and put in and put into place for the building of the 2730 step, but I anticipate it's something that we start building for 3033 and beyond. I think that
Okay.
we're just at just on the cusp of that, of looking at that and looking at how we can change up the cycle so that we have more time to develop appropriate cost estimates before we make construction funding commitments.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I understand why it would be why you would have to wait for the next cycle. But I'm also happy to hear that you guys are thinking about that, because I think that that's like really one way to get at like the most accurate construction estimates possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the things that we're working through is how do we address all of the uncertainties like that projects always have. How do we quantify those when we're programming? And I think that for folks on the in the day-to-day business of delivering projects, project managers and like a lot of the design engineers, they're like, well, you don't know what's going to happen until it happens. I'm like, right, but there are certain kinds of things that we know are going to happen, and we just don't know how they're going to happen and what the impact is going to be. And like my angle and sort of what I want to share a bit more today is that we have a tremendous amount of historical delivery data that should help inform our like forecasting. That delivery, like those historic delivery costs, when we inflate them out to future delivery years, should be able to should help us capture the uncertainties in our for future projects. So I'm going to dig a little bit more into that as I continue to present. So let's go to the next slide. So getting back to that, like we've been using a conceptual bottom-up like approach to build project estimates for funding. And as I said, like those estimates are based on like a really limited amount of project information, because like design, like they're less than 5% design. I mean, this is really early on, and they don't adequately capture the range of uncertainty that plays out like over the course of design. So we have risk logs that we start building during this STIP scoping to start wrapping our arms around all of the uncertainties, but really like adequately capturing all of the things that can play out over the course of a project, which can include like many things, like some things that are absolutely within our control and that we need to like improve how we manage through, and others that are like well beyond our control. And I think we shared some of those back in March. We see state and federal like design requirements change during the life of a project, and those changes can add costs to projects. We see partnership opportunities with other agencies and other projects that can add scope and risk to projects. We see things that change, some for the good and some for the bad, like over the life of a project, and all of those play out long after we do this initial cost estimating work and make and allocate funds to projects. And so like in a lot of cases, when we look at final project costs at the close of construction, and we look back to what was originally programmed, we see projects that are like regularly are 25% more above the original original funding allocations. And that isn't like that. I mean, like that's jarring to think about. And also when we think about the amount of time and like the amount of things that change over the course of time, like it makes sense that happens. And yet we need to change our approach to programming so that we are both like clearly externally communicating like this is how much is allocated for a project, and we will be able to deliver that project within this funding amount. And also we need to like we need to do that both from, I think, an accountability and transparency standpoint, and also from like purely from a planning and project management, portfolio management standpoint. So we really want to
Nova.
account for uncertainties in a very different way when we program the initial portfolio.
Nova?
Chair, yes.
Yeah, based on this summary saying the results in actual final project cost regularly 25% or more of the original funding amounts. Have you looked at the delta of that? Is it regularly 25%? Is that the number that they typically are, or is there a large range? And so if we are reliably 25% more 80% of the time, then why aren't we just adding 25% more to our estimate?
So that's a great question, and that like you're queuing me up for like my very next my very like the next part of this conversation.
Okay.
But no, that's a great question, great comment. I would say that we've been we're digging into our project cost final project cost data to look for trends like that and help it to help inform are there certain disciplines, certain types of projects where there's some uniformity in how much they're going over. And I would say that right now we're not seeing trends that are we're not really seeing trends that we could, I would say, base our cost estimating practices on, in terms of all bridge projects come in 35% over what was originally programmed. It's more it is there's more variation than that. And while we do have we've constructed about 600 projects over the last 10 years. And when we start splitting them up into all of the into all of the categories, type of project, type of highway, because obviously a bridge project on an interstate is really different than a bridge project on a rural highway, for example. There's so many different so many nuances. It's hard to have enough of a data set to say uniformly this kind of project is always 25% over. So we're taking a little bit of a different approach, but it's still using the data to make informed decisions based on what's happened in the past, and how can that help us program for the future. So let's go to the next slide here. So we're, as I said, what we want to do is use essentially as built information to inform future programming, and we are digging into all of that data in a pretty intense way. We have all of the we have project data for all the projects that have been constructed over the last 10 years, and that data captures all kinds of details, individual individual bid item overruns, changes to the project over the life of design, a lot of the details of individual projects. Let's go to the next slide. So we want to use all of that information to build a method for programming 27 the projects in the 2730 STIP. And so, as I said, we've constructed about 600 projects since 2012, and we have the data on all of them, which is really just a reflection on how our the technology and our tools have developed over the last 10 plus years. And we want to use an approach a cost forecasting approach that's called reference cost forecasting, to build a model that to look at what the cost ranges are for different kinds of projects on different kinds of highways, and use that to help identify what kind of how much essentially we should increase the cost estimates for programming purposes based on past experience. So we're still potentially building bottom-up estimates, but then adding multipliers to them based on historic costs. And we're deep in the midst of looking at all of that data and doing a lot of review and economic analysis of the data right now to determine to build that model. And then once we build the model of different kinds of projects, we will we'll build a methodology that we can use to for programming purposes. like this work has really just happened in the has really been happening over the last 2 months. The work that we did like leading up to our March OTC presentation and CIAC presentation was like that initial dig into all of that project total project data, and this has evolved from that effort. As we presented to you in March, we shared a lot of the project data, and you had so many questions about like different ways that we could dice and slice it, and that's essentially what we've been doing to build this forecasting model. And I've been going down a bit of a rabbit hole on reference class forecasting, which is an economic type model for cost forecasting that's being used that's being used worldwide to forecast costs for all kinds of projects, not just not just transportation infrastructure projects, but it relies on this idea that we do a better job of forecasting how much a project is going to cost based on historically how much similar types of projects have cost, rather than what tends to be an optimistic approach to cost estimating when you do a bottom up approach at like early in design.
So help us understand the difference between bottom-up approach and this reference cost forecasting model. Is that a software model, or is it a conceptual model?
It is a it's a mathematical model, but the bottom up cost estimate is looking at an individual project, like a bridge replacement, and saying, okay, to replace this bridge, here are all of the different like bid items that it'll require to build this bridge, and here are estimated quantities and estimated costs for those items to build the bridge. And typically with a contingency put on top of that, and some risk associated, like some risk added to account for like the risks that are known at whatever point you're doing that cost estimate. The challenge doing with a bottom-up estimate for individual projects at scoping is that scoping teams have visited a project site once or twice and are putting together very, very rough quantity estimates for what replacing replacing that bridge is going to cost, and are often to Ms. Brownstein's earlier comment, are not many of the uncertainties surrounding that project are still vague, what utility relocations are going to be required, the scope of right of way that's going to be required, the impact of time on delivery based on permitting process or fabrication of materials, and those are all uncertainties that are not well captured in that conceptual bottom-up estimate, so early in design. The reference class forecasting model takes our body of past projects and creates essentially like a range that tells us that projects of certain types are typically cost this much to deliver, like in full, and will provide a range depending on the type of projects. And the idea is that we would be able to take our bottom up estimates and the types of projects we're looking at, and look at that reference class group of projects and say, historically, when we've delivered bridge replacements of this type on highways of this type, those projects have cost this much all inflated to whatever construction year we're anticipating for these future projects. And so it's a method to reflect back. It is a statistical model. Yes.
Yeah. So to that point, I think that the better inputs, the more inputs we have, the better, the more accurate our outputs will be. And so I'm curious if there's any room for us to work with WashDOT to get their inputs as well, and then share back and forth so that at least we have a bigger pool to draw from.
That's a great question, and it's something that I've been, it's on my, like, my to-do list, if you will. I mean, I think you're catching me mid-process, right? And so, like, I like appreciate the time to share this approach and get input, because we're still very much, like, it's still very much like in the works. And which I think is exciting, and also like perhaps a bit like a bit intimidating to be to be sharing with the group. But Shannon, I think that's a great call, and I have I've been going down the path to see if there are if there are other DOTs that are already like doing a similar kind of approach, and how much we could share, like swap information, share models. So
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me, and I know that the costs are going to vary by region, and that's why I was thinking about WashDOT, but like, it seems to me that like that kind of approach just makes an enormous amount of sense. And like, you just like, I mean, it is not to bring it back to utility planning, but like utilities like run a number of scenarios and they come out with like the most likely scenario. And like, that's what you're proposing. And it makes total sense to me. Um, and, then you can come up with like a much more informed, accurate range of how much a specific project type will cost to deliver.
Agreed. I think that the optimism bias of bottom up estimating this early in projects is like, I mean, we see it play out on a regular basis. I mean, like there are definitely like there's so many gaps in our understanding early on. And I do think that like the more data we have, like the more transportation delivery data we have to like look back on to help inform, I think the better off we'll be. And I can't say like we've certainly, I think that in the past there's definitely been some reflecting back on, oh, does this cost estimate, the cost to deliver this roundabout, how much is it cost, how, like, is this in line with what it's been costing us to deliver roundabout projects, for example? But it's happened in not in an established like process programmatic way, and that's what we're trying to build in, is like is we have so much data on what we've delivered. We have, as an agency, we have so much information about what it is taken to deliver and deliver our program, and having a more established process to reflect on that and use it to inform future costs I think will be tremendous. And I think we have about a year between now and when we will be like setting the draft 2730 STIP. And so like scoping will begin late this summer, and we want to have a tool in place to help inform that scoping, cost estimating work, and then like and more refined by the time we're programming, so we can feel more confident about how we're programming. And I will share that like the outcome of this is that there'll be fewer projects we can program, because we expect to see projects at a higher cost, which means the money won't go as far. And I think there's some trepidation and anxiety about that, but it also means like the goal is to not be adding money over the life of project design.
What happens now
Especially since we don't have any money.
Right.
Well, but
Precisely.
that's my question. So like, let's say you're halfway through a project and you're getting these cost overruns. Like, where does that money come from? How is that, like, how are those holes plugged? And like, again, I mean, you guys are going to think I'm a broken record, but like, I hear you on that trepidation, but it's all about storytelling, because like whatever is happening now is reactive and not strategic.
Yeah.
And there are likely projects falling out of future, like future STIPs, or projects falling out in the short term because the agency doesn't have the money, because it's plugging these unexpected costs. So I think it's just a matter of the narrative.
Thank you. I agree. That's great feedback. I see Rod has his hand up. Go ahead, Rod, and thank you. Welcome. I understand you were delayed, but you're here now.
Yes, so I'm sitting here in Depot Bay Harbor. I just got out of another meeting there, so I hopped on as quick as I could. One of the things that I've seen over my time is just what Shanna was talking about. And the big thing, do we remember the Highway 20 debacle? How that went from, I believe it was supposed to be a $62 million project and ended up being over 200 million. And how do we build in the ability to do projects, but know that we, for example, if we hit 2 or 3 hiccups, those projects go away? And how do we, as Shanna put it, frame that narrative so that people understand that we are limited on funds and that we can't, sometimes we won't be able to deliver the entirety of our project list.
Mayor, it's a great question. I think it's something that we're all tackling right in like real time with project delivery right now. I think that's part of what we've been discussing with the commission recently as we work through some legacy projects that have had substantial cost overruns. As we like the work that Mac Lins and I have been doing within our like delivery and operations division, like recently has been like we like and as an outcome, I mean, this is part of what we presented back in March. We're really having like expanding the conversation with our regions and our program managers to elevate project uncertainty and project risk, I think much sooner and like much more transparently than has happened in the past. And we're trying to like have more like robust conversations about where like projects that have like that where we're seeing considerable risk, like cost risks in design, and then taking the moment to elevate the issue and have a discussion within the agency about how we want to handle the project and like the future of the project. And that, I think I think that we need to do more of that. What I think Mac and I have heard from the commission over the last couple of months is that there's a lot of interest from the commission that we elevate it to the commission and share these projects and these risks as they're coming up in design more broadly and have more of a like robust like agency-wide conversation with the commission as well about whether we want to like prioritize investing in those projects and in spite of like elevated cost risk, or whether we want to take a different path. And I think that is like those are the conversations in front of us, but we definitely need to have a method, like a process and a place to ring the bell, as like several people have said, when we're seeing cost risks elevate and we're seeing like things come up in design that were unexpected that are really adding tremendous like potential cost risk to projects. So that we can all collectively decide, is this what we want to do, and what are the trade-offs of investing more funds in this particular project or this suite of projects, instead of like in taking projects away from taking money away from other projects. Those are absolutely the conversations in front of us.
So Shauna, I see you have one more comment, and then we need to wrap this discussion up and
Yeah.
transition to the next one.
I just wanted to note that like it strikes me that you have like a temporal challenge, because inherent in this program are like the legacy projects that are going to continue to have the issues they have, while you're trying to adjust and create more accurate forecasting for future projects so you don't have those problems. And so I was just thinking for a moment about like going before the legislature to like explain something. And I would recommend, and I'm happy to help with this, like creating like a narrative, like I'm talking 5 bullets that everyone at the agency, like the OTC, like all the directors and deputies and everything, that this is what's happening, this is why it's happening, here's what we're doing about it, and here's why it will be fixed in the future. And what that timeline looks like, so that everyone's really crisp on, we acknowledge the problem, we like are adjusting to the problem, and here's how the problem will be fixed in the next step or whatever it is. But figuring out the short-term messaging and the longer-term goals and messaging is going to be a little bit of a dance, I think.
And I agree, Shauna, 100%. And I think you've hit the nail on the head, which is we tend to over-explain. We tend to take an hour to describe the challenges. And we all need to be able to say it in 5 sentences.
Yeah, and you want
To the
people to stick to the
legislature.
narrative. You want everyone repeating the same thing.
And so, thank you. I think this is a topic we will continue to revisit. And I think we probably should transition over to our next topic, unless Tova, did you have anything, a final thing you wanted to cover?
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate the time and the feedback, and we'll look forward to continuing the conversation in the future.
Great. All right, Amanda, it's your turn.
Great, thank you, Chair. So Michaela, we'll go ahead and pull up our presentation for transportation electrification. So we've come to the CIAC a few times now, talked about efforts of the Climate Office. We've spent some time even diving into transportation electrification to share, what is it that we've learned? What are the needs, and what are some of the efforts that we have underway? This one I'll say is a subset of that. So I know Mayor Krass, you weren't privy to some of the earlier conversations. Shauna, I think you were a little bit more. But this is a little bit more of a deep dive, in particular into grant approaches. So there's funding that comes directly to the state of Oregon to support installation of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. That's known as NEVI. You'll hear a little bit about that in the presentation. We also have set aside some funds to do rebates for adding charging infrastructure in low-income communities, in rural areas, and where we really see the priorities and needs, where the private sector isn't filling in as much, and we're really making sure that we have equitable access and a greater array of charging that make it viable for people to switch to electrification. So that is kind of the rubric we won't be talking in detail about today. We'll focus more in on, there's a lot of federal funding that's available currently or coming available in the future for electrification. And we have finite resources internally to be able to deliver on some of those funds. And so how do we try to focus on those key activities that make a difference? So I think sharing with you all as a body to hear a little bit about some of our thinking, and then help to make sure that makes sense, and help us to prioritize in on the right things. And so that's really the purpose and intent of today's conversation. So let's go next slide, Michaela. So I should pause and say, what does transportation electrification mean? We're really purposeful in that term. It's not just cars and trucks for charging electric vehicles. It's really all aspects of light duty vehicles, freight trucks, transit buses, even electric bikes and electric scooters. So we think comprehensively about the topic. It's a really important piece to addressing our climate needs and our climate goals. So our statewide transportation strategy is our roadmap to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We are on a better glide path to substantially reducing emissions, and we've reduced that gap that's shown on that graph quite a bit in recent years, and a lot of that is due to advancements in vehicles and fuels. That's about half of the solution. It's not the only thing, but it's a really big piece of getting to the climate future that we need to. So this is really just to emphasize electrification is key to Oregon achieving its climate goals. Next slide. As we look at electrification, we did some work now several years ago called the Transportation Electrification Infrastructure Needs Analysis, or TINA, as we lovingly call it. And that really helped us to look specific to Oregon and say, what are our charging needs? What do we think the private sector is going to do? Where are the public needs best? And what we've done is kind of pinpoint in there, what are the needs, particularly for public investment in charging infrastructure, and then what are the priorities within that? And really ODOT's role is around the charging infrastructure. We help to lead across state agencies and convene conversations on the topic as a whole, where DEQ, or Department of Environmental Quality, for example, they provide incentives for vehicle purchases. That's not something we do, but we do the infrastructure side of the EV charging stations. So it's really important to coordinate across those different entities, so all those pieces are working well together. As we focus on kind of ODOT's role within that and charging infrastructure, we see that charging for cars and trucks or light duty vehicles, it's there, it's ready. There's a number of vehicles out on the market. companies that are switching to all electric by 2035 or even sooner than that. So the market's there. What we hear from the public, though, is a lot of concerns around range anxiety. So how do we make sure that we're getting the charging infrastructure out there quickly to reach that tipping point where it's really viable to have electric vehicles? So light duty is our focus. It's ready. We are trying to, I think, catch up on the infrastructure side to make sure that we can meet the future demand. On the medium heavy duty side, there's certainly some manufacturers of freight trucks, for example, and transit buses. I think there's a little bit of a challenge with the chicken and the egg there, that companies are interested in buying these vehicles, but they have worry at the same time. They can charge them, they can maybe put in chargers at their depot, but they're worried about kind of long haul and will they have charging availability on the way? So we need to plan out those, and those are really take a lot of energy for those sites to be able to charge those larger vehicles, which means there's a lot more development work that often needs to happen on the utility side and otherwise. So planning for these, it takes about 5 years on the medium heavy duty side. So while light duty is ready now, medium heavy duty, we need to start because it's going to be ready within that time frame that we need to do. Micromobility for electric bikes, electric scooters, most of that charging happens at people's homes, apartment complexes, other locations, not as much kind of in the public space, but we think we can be opportunistic, adding chargers to some of the larger stations along the way so folks can charge with those lower voltage sites. And I saw, Shauna, you had a comment in the chat. Is that something you want to make sure I touch on now?
You can touch on it or not. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't just focused on deployment and that there were dollars reserved if ODOT is planning on owning and operating chargers, like we should make sure we're talking about managing and keeping those running.
Yeah, so that's a great point. And I'll say ODOT is not stepping into the space of owning and operating chargers. We're really working through public and private partnerships, so electric vehicle service providers and others that will build the sites, host the sites, manage it, operate it, and maintain it. And so the maintenance part, as Shauna mentions, is absolutely key. I think what we've also heard from going out in the public is that people go to these sites and they don't have very good experience. Sometimes they're broken, they can't charge, and that further fosters this concern of range anxiety that even if there are sites, if they don't work, you can't rely on them. That creates some fear. So we need to make sure that whatever we put out there is going to be working long-term. And we try to address that through some of our contracting. So we're reserving funding as we build these projects with our private partners for maintenance specifically. So that's part of some of our strategy there. So maybe I'll turn it over at this point to Mary to kind of walk through some of the other background pieces and talk about where we're thinking some of the priorities might be for going after grants, and then love to hear your feedback on that as well. So Mary, and we'll go next
sure.
slide, Michaela.
Yeah, next slide. Great. So so these are the key priorities that we identified in the TINA study, which is in terms of the near term. So focus on light duty, as Amanda emphasized, and actually, Amanda, you kind of covered a lot of this, that we want to focus on light duty, we want to support depot charging, but public charging as well for fleet electrification, and plan for medium and heavy duty support right now. So I think let's just move on to the next slide. I think this will get to where we are right now is we have 4 programs that are either federally or state funded for EV charging infrastructure. And again, I'm going to emphasize none of these are things that ODOT will own or operate. We have the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, which will provide about $65 million. And we aren't going to go into all those details, but mostly it's on the 11 major highways across the state, and it's fast charging. And that's a federal program that came to us by formula. So we were just given that money. We also, in response to what was alluded to before, that people are worried about reliability of charging, when a federal grant opportunity came up to apply for charging to fix, money to fix broken chargers. We jumped on that and we have $10 million to fix broken chargers and upgrade and expand them in the state. We also have very successfully put in this level 2 charging program that Amanda alluded to, the community charging rebates program. So it's for charging, again, all these are light duty, but it's for charging at longer dwell time locations. So it's at multifamily housing where it's harder to get charging overnight. It's at tourist locations. It's at workplaces. It's in other public venues. And we reserve about we reserve 70% of that funding for rural and we call it priority communities, but some type of disadvantaged community. And that's been very successful. We are administering that in rounds. First round was fully subscribed. The second round has been out since March, and we've already got 2/3 of that subscribed as well. The last one that we have applied for is carbon reduction program funds. And we've asked for money to either upgrade or enhance medium and heavy duty vehicle charging along certain NEVI corridors. And we've just been awarded not a lot of money for that, about $4.5 million, but it will make a start. So that's kind of what we're doing right now. We've got funding for all of this. We're focused on these 4 areas. Next slide. What we're also doing right now
Before you move
is,
from that, there's a question from.
oh, sorry.
Yeah, there's a question from Shauna about, is there a supplier list for vendors who can fix these chargers?
Is
Like Mary, who is the money going to? Like I get that you're focusing on these areas, but like, are you guys,
so the
like, how are
money
you
is,
yeah.
why don't we go back one slide? And so for the fixing the broken EV chargers, all these federal programs are highly prescriptive. And so this particular one, we are limiting the availability. We're launching both the NEVI program and the EV, the electric vehicle, the fix the broken chargers one. It's got a terrible acronym, EVC-RA, but both of those we're launching later this summer. The fixing the broken chargers goes to either an entity that is either the electric vehicle service provider that owns and operates those stations right now, or one that provides the networking. We are not expanding it to any old site host because of the level of federal requirements that you have to comply with. So if you are an owner and operator of the site, and principally those are either electric vehicle service providers or we will also allow those parties that provide the networking operations at a site to, with permission of the site host, fix and upgrade these. And
I
there's
don't understand the terminology you're using. Could you?
And
break
I
it
don't,
down?
I don't
somebody-
either, which is concerning because I worked at Tesla for 2 years and a utility for 5 years.
Okay, so there's a couple of business models for putting in charging. One case, a company like Electrify America or Tesla owns and operates the charger stations. So that would be an owner operator that is an electric vehicle service provider. That's the acronym for it. But anyway, that's one group. Another group of parties that put in charging, put them in at a specific site. They may put them in front of a Walgreens or in front of a Target or something like that.
Can you give
And-
me an example of a company that does that?
ChargePoint.
So you're saying, so can I provide some different language around this?
Sure.
So there's the owner
Thank you.
operators and then there's the equipment providers.
Yes, but we are not just opening it up to any old equipment provider. It needs to be an equipment provider that has an interest in that site already. So they either provided it there or they're currently providing the networking for it.
What do you mean by networking?
The communications that goes back and forth between the equipment provider and to upgrade the charging station and provide
But there aren't, I can't think of any charging equipment out there that doesn't have that software built in.
Okay, but so let's say,
So
Pete-
Mary,
yeah,
I
okay.
feel like we're getting a little bit in the technical details here, and Shauna, feel free to poke if you still want to go down this path.
I don't understand the words you're using either, so you need to explain it.
Yeah,
Okay,
let's
all,
Mary.
all it is that the people who either operate the chargers, or the site hosts agree that the people who put in the equipment for the chargers are going to get the money to upgrade and expand it.
No,
So-
but my question is, like, there are companies out there that provide, like, that just do like construction and maintenance of chargers. And why wouldn't they be qualified? Like, it seems like there's a good economic development opportunity here for those smaller companies.
So there's a couple of things because of the requirements of this particular federal funding, and I'd like to move on after this point, but because of the requirements of this particular federal funding opportunity, you have to do everything within 1 year. Okay, so everything has to be delivered and developed. Not only that, every single port that's broken has to be replaced and upgraded to meet NEVI standards, to meet really high charging standards, and it has to be expanded
Mary,
from 1 port to 4.
Mary,
So
can I jump in here? Because
sure.
And I don't know if my audio is kind of cutting in and out. Looks like it's finally working. So maybe just a higher level way I'd say this is the folks that we'll be working with sometimes are the auto manufacturers. So Tesla, right, that has the electric vehicles. They sometimes put in charging stations. There's also ChargePoint, which is people that are just build charging stations themselves. And then there's utilities, which can own and operate these things. So that's generally the types of entities that we're working with to deliver these projects. I think the complicating piece that we're getting swirled around a little bit is when we install these charging stations, they tend to be on private property. And so sometimes that's a travel center, sometimes that's a Walgreens, sometimes that's a Walmart. So there's also different entities that have agreements with those locations. And so that's where, especially with the fixing broken chargers, there's a number of different mixes of those that we need to work with. When we're talking about putting in a brand new kind of network, it's going to be more like a single entity that's prime, that's working with a number of different folks. They'll develop agreements and says, hey, is it okay, Starbucks, if we have a EV charging station on your property? So there's that kind of mix of things. But at the highest level, those are kind of the folks we're talking about. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. I guess I'm struggling to think. Like, so ODOT is the grantor
Correct.
to these companies that are either the charge points or the Tesla superchargers, insofar as that team still exists, like, or the like EVgo's or the Electrify Americas of the world. They're entering into bilateral agreements with private property owners. Utilities are entering into bilateral agreements with private property owners. And okay.
And then we
I
say,
understand. I'm just worried, Mary, that this is getting overly complicated. And I don't want to see that happen, because this is a really cool program and opportunity for the state.
And these are all for profit charging locations?
yes, these are all for-profit charging locations. These already exist. So they wouldn't be broken chargers if they didn't exist. So that particular grant is just to upgrade chargers that are broken as of a date certain that the federal government picked for us. And only those sites are eligible to receive funding. And the funding has to be expended within 12 months. And they have to not only bring it up to a much higher standard per charging port, but if it's a site that only has one charging port, one plug, then it has to have 4. Those are the federal government's requirements.
So one other thing I want to interject real quick, which is we have a thing that we did called a partnership pool, and all the entities that I was talking about, the main entities, they've kind of pre-qualified into that. So we've looked and we've made sure, hey, you know how to deliver these things. You've had a good success record. You know that you need to get site agreements and you've done those before. And you know who you need to subcontract to for electrical work and all those kind of things. So we've gone through that process so to streamline it later so that as we've had these different opportunities, we can pull from that group. I think trying, to your point, Shauna, keep it simple at a high level. Those are the entities that know how to work down through things. We shouldn't be monkeying down through things.
Okay.
We aren't. And Shauna, to your other point for workforce development, in the programs where we have a little bit more control and leeway, like the NEVI, all of these are very highly prescribed, and some of them say you can do things and some say you can't do things with disadvantaged business enterprises. But for example, for NEVI, we are going to be having a webinar for COVID companies to enable them to partner with other folks. So to try and require the parties that are in our partnership pool to meet with them and have an opportunity to talk. So we're trying to do it where we can. But there are
So Mary, I want to get back to Shauna's question and see if the chair, if that's helping kind of give that base level before we're moving on here. So Shauna, go ahead.
I think so. Yeah, I think I might just like communicate it a little differently. Mary, I understand that these grant funds are very prescriptive. But there's still a lot of room. Like I would love to know, like, okay, you have 12 months to rip and replace those broken chargers. Like, what's the plan? How much power is going to be needed if you have to upgrade from, 1 plug to 4? Like, because the utilities are going to need time on that. Like, so there needs to be a lot of like pre-work that goes into this. Like, I'm happy to help think through it, but like, to do all of that in 12 months and adequately access those funds is going to be hard.
We know that, and we've tried to get we've had lots of conversations with the federal government about that. But I will just let you know that every single company whose broken charger was on the list that we submitted to the federal government to be fixed was spoken with. So we talked to the charge points and the Electrify America and the EVGOs. Not only that, we said, what is it going to cost? What's it going to take? So they all had an opportunity to give us, prior to us applying for those funds, by each site, what amount of money was going to be needed to bring it up to this standard. So they have had some advance warning. They also know that we've been awarded the funding. And so that these are the sites that are eligible and they can begin working with.
If they're going to apply to fix the sites, because if the sites don't have good utilization or their data shows that they're not going to be used, like I would hate to see you guys do all this work and have them be like, we're not going to go for that money.
So if I may, I'll give it just a brief little history on that one. So we had talked to the joint office who's running all the funding and saying, gosh, there's a lot of chargers that are out there now. Wouldn't it be great if we fix those? And so in many ways, based on our recommendation, they started this program. When they came out with the rules, all the states were like, oh boy, how you wrote those, that makes it really tricky for how we can do this work. But since we had, convinced them to do the program, it's like, well, we'll put our hat in the ring. And we got the money. So it's great. At the same time, there's a lot of known challenges we have walking into this one. And I think you're highlighting many of them, Shauna. So yeah, at some point, if you're interested in sitting down with us, I think we're happy to chat a little bit more.
Yeah, I would love to, because I want to see us like a lot of things need to come together to like go out and get those dollars and get that work done. And like, I would love to see, and I don't know if this is like legal, and if it isn't, I apologize and rescind the comment, but like, I want to see these companies show up for the state. And I want to see these companies know that like, if they don't like hop to on this funding pool, like that's going to count against them in NEVI. Like that's going to like count against them on these other programs that the state will remember this. Because
yeah,
I want them motivated to like fix these chargers that might not be money makers, because that's where we need them.
Yep, totally agree with that. Thank you.
We agree. So
Mary?
can we move on? Can we go on to
Well,
other things, or else we're not going to cover any of these things?
Right, before you do, Rod had a question about, well, I guess not really a question, but how does local government and like the city owning chargers and libraries, how does that fit into
So maybe
this
I'll just answer that as super
process?
high level to say, cities, communities are eligible for the community charging rebate program that's been mentioned a couple times. So if those entities own the chargers and want to install them, great. For the most part, when we are looking at some of these funding programs, we're looking at like a whole corridor, which crosses multiple jurisdictions, which is why it's a little different for that. But I think there are programs certainly available to cities, Mayor Cross.
So the
So-
repair one doesn't.
Right. So that's why I'd asked, and I also got a hold of my city manager to find out who runs ours, as far as who we have the maintenance contract with, and it's ChargePoint. So that made me feel a little better since you all mentioned that. Because I was serious. I was afraid that we had, that we were in charge of doing it, and it's like we don't have anybody that can do it. We have the guys put it in.
No, that's exactly why we are planning to go to the parties that know how to, provide the equipment, know how to install it, know how to maintain it, especially in such a short time frame. As Shauna has pointed out, it's very challenging, very difficult program to get going. But there is our community charging rebates program that the cities are welcome to participate in, and there are other federal funding opportunities where cities are welcome to participate. And we can, I'll highlight one of those in a second, but I think we can go beyond this slide. These are the 4 programs that we're working on right now. And then I wanted to look at what we're going after in future. We're looking at expanding our our community charging rebates program under the first one on the left, where I've said submitted. The climate pollution reduction grant program would go to the Department of Environmental Quality actually submitted this to the US EPA for a whole host of programs. There's a $10 million slice in there for us to expand the community charging rebates program to further support low income and disadvantaged communities with both level 2 and DC fast charge. So this funding would help us do DC fast charge in rural and disadvantaged communities. And that was submitted April 1st. So that's already in the hopper, waiting to be evaluated by the US EPA. The 2 things that we're working on currently, one is medium and heavy duty charging from a federal highway program to try and put in major charging hubs along Interstate 5 with California and Washington. We are submitting that proposal. We submitted one last year that was much more comprehensive. This year, we're going after a more targeted one that reflects their strategies that they've published in the National ZEV Freight Corridor Strategy. So that would be a corridor project. We are also looking at a transmission economic development project that would be under the Boardman to Hemingway transmission line. And that is for workforce development, as well as DC fast charging and level 2 charging in communities in rural Eastern Oregon, where that are impacted by the transmission economic development, by the transmission line. So we haven't, that one is one we'll take up in August. That would also be an expansion of our community charging rebates program. So we're trying not to build new programs, but just expand existing ones where we can. We are considering 2. The second one is the one that's in purple-ish. The cities might be interested in this one, the Communities Taking Charge Accelerator. We decided not to just follow up on this, even though it had some great opportunities for electric micromobility and fleet focus. The concept paper is due on Monday, and we discovered that there were many other entities within the state that were working on both of those areas in submitting their own concept papers to get pre-qualified to bid. And so we decided to pass on that one already. But at the time we put these slides together, we were still considering that. The other one we're considering is a community focused one on corridor charging, but for some more community areas, a smaller effort with both fast charging, again, on non-NEVI corridors. And the main reason that we're considering that is because several cities and towns asked us last year if we would be willing to go in with them on projects, or if we would lead a project that would cover their city and some surrounding areas. And we didn't have bandwidth last year. We're not sure we have bandwidth this year, but people were asking us, so we have that on our considering list. There's a couple of medium and heavy duty opportunities that are out there that either ODOT is not eligible for, the ports one in particular, or that the Department of Environmental Quality is going to take the lead on, which is the clean heavy duty trucks opportunity. They will take the lead because it's mostly vehicle incentives with some depot charging, and that is where DEQ focuses. So those are the big things that we're doing that are
So
known.
maybe, Mary, I'll say this a little simpler for things. So our primary, if we look at the sources of money we have today, and the commission putting kind of $100 million commitment towards this based on federal funds and state funds, we're putting that all in light duty vehicles. That's because, again, we feel that it's ready. We are with some of the federal funds, as well as some of carbon reduction funds, it's additional federal funds. We're trying to make some of the sites and locations that we build for light duty be able to accommodate at least medium duty. So we're thinking about things like pull-through designs for larger vehicles. If we can get like up to 350 kilowatt chargers in some locations, so that it is that higher capacity or even higher than that, and kind of pre-wiring things in. But we don't have the dedicated funding on the medium and heavy duty side. So I would say our federal grant approach in many ways is focused on the medium and heavy duty side, because we see that as a significant gap. So the CFI charging and fueling infrastructure piece, that's a big one to help do that. Looking for kind of application with California and Washington to do Interstate 5. We've put in applications on the past to do Interstate 84. We currently are reaching out to the trucking community to get feedback from them on what are their priorities and needs to help inform that. At the same time, one of the programs that's easily scalable is our community charging rebates. So where we can seek additional federal funds that can dump into that, or even state funds, I think that's an easily scalable program, very popular. So I would say those are some of our primary focus areas. And I want to see if there's any feedback or thoughts as we talk about this. And I think maybe through questions, Mary, we can explain some of the other pieces if there's questions.
The only thing I would say is, as you are working on, one of the things we saw in California is that particularly in areas where there was not a population center, the utilities have a really hard time getting capacity to a specific location. So like if you think about places that would make good truck stops, and you think about each truck needing a megawatt charger or kilowatt, like that's a lot of power. And so to the extent you can start thinking about locations and talking to the utilities about pre-planning, or what is their plan for do they have a plan for upgrading this area? Can we add a little extra space? What are the make ready programs that exist? Or even getting money to the utilities to add that capacity. I promise you it will get used. The other thing that I want, and again, I don't know what this is all going to look like, but I think ODOT has a really important role to play on permitting streamlining in the right of way. And so like, as utilities are putting in poles and wires to meet the needs of charging infrastructure, like how can ODOT make it as easy as possible to get the power to those locations?
Yeah, and Shauna, those are all great points. And we just issued a request for information for the medium and heavy duty project along Interstate 5. We issued a request for information from California, Oregon, and Washington. And we asked specifically, we sent it to utilities, and we are asking specifically for that kind of insight. Where in these bandwidths of locations that we have, we are prioritizing, where might there be a sufficient power, and sort of helping to flag for them that we might need them to start thinking about this.
I will be very surprised if you get anything back on that, because utilities don't tend to like, well, I don't know. But some utilities have publicly available capacity hosting maps. So that's one place to look. I think what I would do is I would look at like a map of Oregon and see which utilities are overlapping which parts of I-5.
We did.
And just start looking at those guys. The ones that you're going to struggle with are the small munis and co-ops.
Yeah, and we know that. And when we did our NEVI state plan, Shauna, we did reach out to utilities with a request for information and got them for the first few years, first few corridors on the first year. And
But what I
we did
remember
get
about
more
that, Mary,
information.
was you were looking at really small sites. You were looking at like 4-stall sites. There's not going to be a capacity constraint for 4-stall sites.
Yeah,
Well,
you're right. I think what Mary's getting at is we've had some good discussions with some of the largest utilities who have sat down and shared some information. But I think, Shauna, part of what you're getting at, and that's a challenge in the space in general, is there's a little bit of proprietary information from utilities, from the trucking industry, from the manufacturers. What I see is for sure a willingness kind of behind the scenes through informal conversations to be able to share that with us, and then we can kind of use that as points of information. So generally we'll get kind of like, hey, in this general vicinity you can see this, but they're not going to show us really detailed maps, just because they see that as some of their competitive edge in either getting funding or stepping into some of this market and space. So thankfully we've got some good partners and some good relationships that we can at least have those informally, and I think that will help us immensely as we look at planning these out.
So does the
Yeah,
PUC have any authority to get information as part of their regulatory scheme? And if not, is that legislation that we ought to look at?
I'm going to defer to Shauna on that one, but I will, except to say,
What was I didn't hear the
it only
question,
works
but-
with the investor-owned utilities. The biggest challenge, the investor-owned utilities, Pacific Power and PGE, are really pretty on top of things, very willing to work with us, very willing to share information on locations when they have it. Like it could evaporate between now and when we get around to building things. They may have capacity now and it may be gone 3 years from now or 5 years from now when things actually get built. But it's really the co-ops, the municipalities, the public utility districts where it's a little bit more challenging to get that information.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead, Shauna.
Oh, just so the PUC only has oversight over the IOU, so PAC and PGE,
What's an IOU?
an investor-owned utility. Sorry.
Thank you.
It's okay. No, like you think there's acronyms in transportation, like welcome to energy. So many acronyms. So, like what I would want to see and what I would do, and maybe you already did this, is I would be looking at all of the ODOT rights of way in the state of Oregon overlapped with utilities and thinking about like, okay, where are we likely to need a lot of power? Where do the truckers want truck stops? Where are our corridors where we have heavy duty trucking? Where are the fleets? Like we know where the fleets are, I'm sure we have data on that. Like, and then just start mapping this out and then go to the utilities and be like, hey, you jabronis, get your act together. Like we are going to need a lot of power. We're going to need like 50 megawatts in this location. And right now you have 0. So like I would start doing that and getting started. Like it's going to be more expensive in municipal utility territory. So think like EWEB, Eugene Water and Electric Board, versus PGE, because PGE makes money by investing in infrastructure and EWEB tries to like minimize it because they don't want their rates to go up. So you're going to have like all of these different like pressures, and that may really inform where you put charging infrastructure.
Yeah,
Um,
but let me just say two things about this charging infrastructure location issue. Most of the federal grants that we are seeking for this, we are going to have the private sector identify those locations within bandwidths. We will say, here is an area where we think there is a need. You know, there's a need within a regional hub area around Portland, around Eugene, around a few other places. Some of this, especially for medium and heavy duty freight, Shauna, is highlighted in this national ZEV freight strategy. So we will be encouraging the locations, but the private sector will also be working with the utilities. But we have already begun the conversation with the PUC and with utilities, the major utilities, Pacific Power, PGE, to try and understand the whole process of maybe asking for, you know, advance development of locations.
so
You know,
that is, I mean, the proactive upgrading of infrastructure in preparation for charging, like that is like a PUC issue. And they are looking, just so you guys know, they are looking at creating like a tranche of proactive investment opportunities in California to address this issue. And the reason for the folks that aren't like in the weeds on this is because typically the way utilities work is, let's say I need 10 megawatts of power because I'm building a hospital. I'm going to go to the utility and I'm going to put in a request for 10 megawatts of power, and they're going to do their studies and they're going to do their large load studies, and then they're going to look at ordering transformers, and that might take a couple years. It might take a while. It might take 5 years. And they have to get maybe the land access, easements, things like that to upgrade the substation. But that's okay because I'm building a hospital and it takes me 5 years to do all of that also. The issue with charging infrastructure is that you can build a charging site in like 18 months. And the time it takes the utility to make upgrades to infrastructure does not align with that. So like we're kind of in a land grab for electric capacity. And so I think, you know, to the extent the PUC can allow the utilities to make some like, you know, safe bets, or to the extent like ODOT can say like, look, we're going with PGE or we're going with PAC to the PUC to say, we are going to be developing charging infrastructure around here. Consider this the application for power, even though the private sector hasn't come along yet to decide where exactly it's going to go. I mean, those are some different options, but I that might be a way to go forward.
yeah, we are working in the ZEVIWIG in our zero emission vehicle interagency group, which the PUC is part of, as well as Department of Energy.
I forgot about the ZEVI.
Yeah, so it exists, and we are working on all of these issues. We
So-
are initiating conversations on with the PUC on this, and we are the other thing I want to just highlight is the Oregon Department of Energy is doing a statewide energy strategy that is going to raise all these issues as well. But we've had also with the investor, with, you know, PGE and Pacific Power, we have already begun conversations about this advance investment idea, and we've begun those conversations with the PUC. So we're moving that dialogue forward. We're moving that discussion forward already, and we are.
So Mary,
Go
I'm
ahead.
just reflecting in the chat. Chair Smith would like to kind of wrap this conversation up. I think we've gone a little deep on some of the issues. Not that that's not helpful, but
That's the whole point of this committee.
yeah.
So,
Okay, good.
Well, could we just flag up the last slide, and I'll just tell you what we're struggling with as we're trying to come up with a grant strategy. It's not, and what we did is a lot of discussion about the grants either we've
2
got right
minutes.
now. Yeah, so just the next slide. Right, no, that one right there. That just says, here's what we're dealing with. There's a once in a lifetime opportunity for funding out there right now. We have an enormous need in every single category of charging infrastructure, whether it's light duty or medium duty or heavy duty or electric micromobility. We are using our priorities that we established in TINA to guide our efforts. We are staying within our role. Our role as ODOT it tends to be public charging infrastructure, and our role within the climate office. E-mobility is covered by our public transit division as our buses, and the Department of Environmental Quality leads on vehicle incentives and on-site charging for the medium and heavy duty arena, mostly through their incentive and rebate programs. And then the challenges that we've got are bandwidth, not only to develop the proposals, but to deliver them internally and provide oversight. We don't always know when these proposal opportunities are going to come out. Some are standard and known. We know that we're going to have same opportunity over the next 3 years. You know, each year there's going to be something, but many are unknown and they just pop out and you have to respond. You know, are you going to try and go after this money or not? And so right now, what we're trying to do is figure out what the likelihood is of winning it. What are the rules? How difficult is it to actually implement? And, who else is likely to be going after this money? And, are they more likely to win it? Or, can we kind of rely on them going after it and not add more to ODOT's place? Our capacity to implement and, whether or not TINA is our TINA alignment is being met, like that in particular, are we going after the areas that are highest priorities or areas where nobody else has funded it yet? And then
Mary,
that's it.
Yeah, I see the mayor has his hand up. Make sure we get to that.
Sorry, I dropped out. Apparently, my card charger will not keep up with the use on my laptop.
Electric vehicle would help. Just
So
kidding.
it's a hybrid. Don't worry. I have a proposal. I won't go into the weeds on it now, but would you all like to hear a possible proposal of a public-private partnership that might be a good kickoff for this TINA program?
Sure, go for it.
Yeah.
Okay, I will flesh it out on an email and send it out to the committee.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
All right,
excellent.
thank you.
Look forward
Thank
to that.
you. Well, we're gonna wrap up and maybe I'll turn it to Leah if you have any final remarks before we close.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
This has been a super helpful conversation, I think. I think some of my takeaways were from the project delivery conversation in working on more of a very condensed narrative around identifying maybe 5 bullet points on what's happening, why and what are we doing about it, and then maybe recirculating that and bringing that back so that everybody here, as well as kind of leadership, are all on the same page about what that looks like. And I think the electrification conversation has been super helpful. As Amanda said, it was a little bit in the weeds, but I think that maybe kind of framing out some of the next step pieces, as Mary was kind of talking about, would be helpful as just a recap as we kind of move into the space of the what's next around this. So I appreciate all of the questions around that, but those are my big takeaways from today.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. We tried to push too much into one meeting and we'll do a little better job of hopefully going forward so that we can, get into the weeds because that's what we really like. So, and then we will reconvene. We're going to take a break. And our next meeting will be in June, on June 6th. And I appreciate everybody being here today and the good conversation.
Yeah, thanks for the feedback. Appreciate it.
Thank you
everyone.
very much for
Thanks.
your thoughts.
Have a great
Thanks.
day. Bye.